wait a little bit or get started now?
It's done now. It's done now.
I'm going to be talking about mathematical graphs. It's a theory of mathematics that is a little bit more intense than just numerical mathematics. But, it's used in computer stuff quite a bit. So also I know I have it in my voice. So if I seem to be kind of fading out, just say, hey, 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 you're fading out. Okay, so, yeah. So first I'm going to go over like a definition of a graph, which will be kind of like, you know, and then I'll talk about some uses that graphs are in. And then we'll go into the fun stuff where I've actually got some programming that uses a graph. So what is a graph? Here's like an example definition of what's called a directed graph. It seems to be the most general graph that there is. Alex with his algorithm book will say, hey, there's a red-black graph, there's binary graphs, there's all kinds of graphs. So, but we basically say let A be a set, a directed graph or diagram is V together with a subset E of V by cross V. We prefer the V as vertices of the diagram and E as the edges of the diagram. And we denote the diagram VE. If VW is an edge, we call it an edge with VW, column V its tail, and column W its head. That's from the Mathematical Methods in Artificial Intelligence. It's right down at the bottom. What the heck does all that mean, right? So here's an example of a graph. And the arrows would be the edges of the vertices. And the symbols that we're going to try and calculate by are the nodes. So we're basically saying that this is a one-way directional graph that calculates a quadratic equation. And it's useful in symbolic computing and in compiler design, because if you write something out in algebraic form in your source code, your compiler is going to have to break it down. And so one of the ways that we do that is with a graph. Another thing that we might use graph for is for a bill of material and the order that things fall together in. Might be more Flint oriented, but we'll have like the chair, and the chair is made up of a leg assembly, a seat, and a back assembly. And then each of those things, except for the seat, will be made of some other stuff. And so when you go ahead and try to make bill of materials of that sort of thing, a lot of that is stored in a graph too. So. And then here's the one that I'm going to demo, is representing a map in an adventure game. This is probably before most of you, but at the time when adventure games were text-based, so I just put together a real quick one. And so you can see the nodes are rooms, and the vertices are compass directions, so there'll be a north, south, east, west. They're bidirectional, so that's a little different than the directional that I showed. And this also could be for a real estate ad. You know, if you want to show somebody's house or something like that, and kind of give them a feeling for what it's like inside. So each of these nodes have a unique number. I put that in there for a table that you're going to see in the very near future. So what we want to do is uniquely identify each one of the nodes, and then we'll create a map, and we'll also create a description of the node for these. So how I put together a real quick one is we've got a MySQL database, and there's going to be the rooms, which is representational of a graph as a table, and the description, which will be further info on the nodes. And then since I'm using an HTML interface, we'll need a special table called session to hold variables for a stateless application. So a little more explanation as we get into it. So for this, we're going to be looking at these pieces. There's going to be an HTML user interface, which will be an index.php file. There's going to be a data structure for the graph, which will be a class rooms.php file, and a data structure for the stateless stuff, which I won't really talk too much about, but that'll be class session and class util. A data structure for the DB, which is class DB and class config, and then implementing data structures with classes. So there was some confusion on the internet when I researched this a little bit about, well, what's the difference between a data structure and a class? Well, a data structure is data and operations on that data, and classes represent a syntactical way of doing that. So when people talk about data structures, it's more about like that book that Alex has, where they just talk about the operations that are going to happen on that, and it's not in any particular language. Classes, it's in a particular language. So, anyhow. So now we go to the website. So we can do two things. We can kind of wander around, or we can go into the guts of it. Which way should we go? Let's do the wandering around so we got an idea of what we're trying to achieve with all the technical stuff. So I've got a brief description of where we're at. So that's a porch. Let's bring up that one PHP thing. So that's a porch. If we go south, we should see a living room. We go west, it should be the bathroom. If we go east, it should be the kitchen. And if we go south again, it will be a bedroom. So basically, that's the idea. So let's go south. And set the camera. Okay.
It's an adventure.
Yeah, it's an adventure. Might have been a cookie. Now, this was just working when I tried it at home. Oh. It's case sensitive. Here we go. Okay. So that's something that I didn't put into the interpreter. There's another piece of it called a language interpreter, which I didn't really build up because that's a whole discussion in itself. So basically we just type in what direction we want to go. So if we go north, we should go back to the porch. South again. And we're in the living room, and then south again. Should put us in the bedroom. So there's the bedroom. So how's all this work? Well, it's contained in a database called Flint Coder, and it's made up of a table called the description. The rooms are in a graph, and then the session table that I use. So if we go into description, we see that it's basically a room number and then just the description. So that's what we're working with. And you can see that for room 1, it's a porch, room 2, it's a bathroom, blah, 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 etc. The more interesting thing is the rooms. So this structure has got the room number, and then the room number to the north of it, the room number to the south of it, the room number to the east and to the west. So that's how I encoded the graph. And then the fill in the blanks, basically, if you're in room 1, there's only one room you can go to is 3, which is the bedroom, or the front room, which was it? The living room. So there's, see, a 3 and a 4, 2, 1 on the porch, blah, 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 etc.
So you do all this within PHP MyAdmin?
Yeah.
And is that a program on your computer?
Yeah, you can download it for free. There's a site for it. And MySQL is for free also. And PHP is for free. There's a reason why I chose all these, is because they're all free and easily accessible to starting with.
MySQL?
Yep.
Is for?
It's the database.
Okay.
So you install all these separately, because I have them as a part of a XAMPP package, you know, the LAMP package, I should say, Linux and Apache, MySQL PHP.
Yeah, that's it.
So you just install all these separately.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's lots of combinations. If you look on the internet for MySQL, PHP, there'll be like the Zenpack that he was talking about, which is Windows oriented. This Apple comes with Apache and PHP, so I don't really need any of that stuff, but I do need the database, so I downloaded the database from Oracle. And also this PHP MyAdmin is pretty useful for like mucking around inside the database, otherwise it's all text-based. So,
Gives it a user interface.
yeah, a much friendlier user interface.
Yeah.
And then I'll quickly talk about this session. And this is basically a cookie value that gets set on the browser, because even though it's on the same computer, we're on a stateless system. So the browser doesn't know about anything that's happening on PHP until it sends it something and PHP comes back. After that, all the variables are cleared out and you're ready to go again. So what I do is I set up a cookie value which stays with the browser, and when I submit the PHP, the cookie goes with it, and then it goes into the session table, and you can see I use, I'll show you the code in a bit for the cookie value, and then I keep track of variables that are related to the HTML interface and to the PHP program that we're trying to run that need to be in state. So, and then I've got this last used. This is I think it's micro-time or something like that, or it's second since 1977. Either way, it's the way to automatically log out a web browser. I'm using a package that I've written for another application, so that's basically what's going on there. So I've done it 3 times, but in this one, the cookie, I think if we, I can't show the cookies on this one, but the cookie is part of the browser. So does that make sense to everybody? And this is basically what I use to create the PHP classes and the HTML page. If you all have any questions, just speak up and say it. What the heck are you talking about? So this is get some room on the screen. So just get rid of oops. Alright. So here is not empty. Huh. So here we are inside the HTML for the actual way that it talks to it. So how it's set up is there's HTML that gets thrown out by a browser, which gets generated by a PHP process, which talks to a database. So hopefully that makes sense. But basically we're setting up some classes here. So I've got a DB session, a graph, and the natural language interface. We grab a new DB connection, set up a session in it, start our graph with a call it graph walker in a natural language called natural language. Here's an error message, so if we get a 0 back, as you saw in that table, it recognizes that there was an error and it basically knows that something's got to be sent back to it. Right here is pretty simple. It's like describe my room and describe the error message, if anything, and give me an input and show me my submit button. So basically, the first time we come through here in PHP, this variable won't be set to anything. So we say set a cookie and call it Flint Coders 1. So that would be kind of like a variable name for the cookie. If any of this starts like not making any sense, just say something. And then we set the cookie by the session, so let's go to the class session. Come on in. It's the cookie. So for the cookies, I've kind of got a generate session ID, which calls a random string in class util, which I don't have open. Basically just generates a random string and sets the cookie in that class to the cookie value.
So this is all PHP code right here?
This is PHP code, yep.
And you can also do HTML coding in Dreamweaver.
Yes.
That's pretty nice.
And this is something called parameterized SQL statements. When you hear all about these SQL programs that get attacked by SQL injection, they're not using parameterized statements. They're just creating a select or an update or a delete statement from the inputs. And if it's from the inputs, you can't really trust the inputs, because if somebody knows what they're doing, they can just put like semicolon, this is my SQL statement, and then pass it along. And a lot of programs will just pass it along to the database. They'll ignore the first one because there was an error, there was a semicolon. Oh, that's my next SQL statement. Voila, we just got attacked by SQL injection. So,
Right, that's how people can hack it, is because people use the defaults.
yeah,
Like instead of parameterizing it,
Yep, so if you ever want to do SQL, always use parameterized SQL. Otherwise you're begging for an attack on your machine.
So hopefully it doesn't do.
Yeah. So this statement actually goes to MySQL. So PHP isn't actually just executing it. It goes to MySQL, which executes it. So it's kind of straightforward. You bind in a name and the cookie to go here and here. And then you execute it, and then you grab the result, and it sends back the result. So here's the way that we set the session. And we basically update the session, and we insert into it and delete. So this can get rather long-winded. I'll just do one of these. This graph here's where we get the room description. So that comes into play in the source code. So here's the get room description from the graph.
The source code is in HTML.
It's in PHP.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what they.
That's a high-level organization file for the rest of the files.
Right. That way we can. I usually keep classes in their own individual files. That way they can't get messed with. Or people just go, well, I'll just cut and paste the graph or class into this PHP file, and then all sorts of wonderful stuff starts happening when they say, hey, this class isn't working like it should be, and it turns out to be somebody's using completely different code than what everybody else is accustomed to. So,
it's good to stick to the standard.
yeah,
Like,
or create standards. So there's a whole like naming, like for example, you'll see that it has CLS session.php, so that's a clue that it's actually a class. It's not like an executable sort of thing. So basically, if we go back to our class graph here, we want to go to a direction. So we take our value from, here's our command. So this is how you basically do it. It calls interpret. And interpret is pretty easy. It just throws back what it was, because I was going to write something more fancy, and then I was like, no, I'm not. So that this is why it's case sensitive. We basically do our cases, a switch case on north, and then we just call go north on our graph. And for going north, we'll just grab the north room and pass it back. We set our session with what direction we put in there. So here we're putting our room number into it. And then we just show our room and we're ready for the next explanation. I could go really more deeper into this, but if you guys aren't PHP programmers or in-depth programmers, maybe it might be a little waste of time.
Maybe if we could access the code after to go deeper on our own time.
Yep. I'll put the code, I'll put out the schema for the database and the data for the database into a zip file, and I'll put it out with the camera file. So.
And I noticed you can, like when you're opening the web browser, it you're basically projecting this website on the local network. Is that
On the laptop, yeah.
on your laptop?
Yeah, because I got Apache on here, so the real inside and out.
Because you're using your laptop as its own little server for
Yeah.
itself, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they kind of get.
And Bash is like a command prompt, basically, interface
Yep.
for.
Character interface to a Unix system, because Apple's run Unix.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so,
That's why you guys do programming in like C type languages.
yeah.
Is Linux based on a Unix system as well?
Linux is a Unix-like system? Yeah. It's a mixture, there's two Unixes. There's a major Unix called BSD, which was put out by Berkeley, the University of California. And then there's another Unix called System 5, which was put out by AT&T. And they basically gave it away because it wasn't their main business, wasn't operating systems. They just needed it for printing out stuff, I guess. So.
And it spiraled into
Yeah.
like,
And then the people from Berkeley got hold of it, and they're like, oh, this is cool, it's an operating system, and we can see how it's made, and stuff like that. So they went with System 5, then AT&T said, hey, somebody should be paying for this. And that's how Berkeley got started, the BSD version got started, and almost all of them are based off of System 5 or BSD. So. And then the Linux came along, and he merged the two of them together. So there's System 5 command set, but it's a BSD under the hood. So
for
like,
Linux.
yeah, so
And
sound.
then, so Apple uses System 5.
It actually uses a BSD version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's more BSD. So if I can remember what I'm trying to show. So these are all the processes that are running on this computer, basically programs. And the interesting one is Apache. So I'm just going to find it real quick by prepping for Apache. So there's Apache basically running. There's MySQL is running. So I can actually see that the data directory is in user local MySQL data. So that's basically, that's running. And then PHP is part of HTTP. So that's basically, we're just showing the same thing.
So SQL is just file order.
SQL. It's standard query language, and it's something that you pass into the database to have it do something. So let's say, let's hope I can remember how to do this. Of course not. This is what happens when you spend all your time with the PHP stuff, you forget about the commands. find out what his name is. Flint Coder. And there's, well, anyhow, this prompt here is basically your real SQL stuff. So this is a third process in the scheme of things. There's the browser, that's one process. It talks by sockets to the HTTP server, which is Apache. That does the HTML and executes the PHP. And when it executes the PHP, that little bit of code says, hey, I need to talk to MySQL. And it talks to this third process called MySQL. So, let's see if we can. Get some stuff.
So how do you get that list of commands?
Um,
You just have to list all MySQL.
Yeah, basically. And then when you go into this is like the command line editor for it, or command thing. That's basically. So that I'm actually in the MySQL server by a command line program, which is called a client. So the server's running in the background. So how to connect? Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't spend a lot of time in here. I just set up my database just enough so I can use PHP, and then from there, I bail.
Yeah, it can get pretty sticky in there, I guess. Command prompt is like this, right?
Yeah, so here's like one of the commands, trying to get it. It's a really old version. Anyhow, I guess we won't do too much for it, but here's like, this is the actual version you get for Apple. They call their operating system underneath the GUI Darwin, so it's a Darwin version of Unix. Anything else? Is everybody's eyes glazed over quite enough now?
I think I'm good for this one.
So if we check this session again, let's just go, I'll show you how these interact with each other. Oops. Where are we? That can't go away
That's
that
the
way.
error
That's
message.
the error message.
Gotcha. That's saying like put in input that works.
Yep.
What are you doing?
You can be a lot more ruder about it.
Right.
A then if we come over here and look at this thing here, should be in room. So we're actually using this session. So you saw this room number change to 3. So I'm going to blow these other sessions away here. So it's more obvious what we're doing. And if I go south again, let's go east. Then we're in the kitchen. And you can see this session changed its room number from 3 to 4. So, and then we use that to look up inside rooms. We say, what's room number 4? Sorry, description, what's room number 4? It's a kitchen, and then we spit it back out. So that's really kind of the looping that we're doing.
And each one of those files are considered a class file of the information that they're storing.
Yeah, like if we go into...
Go back, you've got a description. So.
Yeah, I've got like a class. Well, no, this is the database.
Okay.
So all this stuff is in the database. So like how I talk to a database is through this class DB, which uses class config. So let's open up class config. So since I use different databases on different systems and stuff, I keep a host user, password, and database connection information. So if the server is my local PC, this is the stuff that I use.
Gotcha.
Or else if the server is something else, then I can just push everything to like a website or something like that. So that gets used by class DB. So this is actually using hierarchical stuff. Class DB extends that class config, and basically we connect to it through something called MySQL and blah blah blah, and that's basically you got your connection, and then I keep that connection handy in a public variable. So, and then go to the source code here. So I've got the connection to the database. So I just create a new class DB, which calls config, gets that information, that calls the connect, gives me the database connection. So I've got the database connection for the execution of this page. And then when this page is done, it pretty much lets go of that database connection. And so basically you have to reconnect to the database on your web pages every time. There's ways to do the database connections to stick around for more high performance stuff, but
More cookies.
no, just more configuration on the PHP side and the database side. So. And then we got that session which holds our local variables, which was in that one table. So there's really only one that's of interest, our room number. So we're basically saying, if we ain't got a cookie, set the cookie, remember the cookie in the database, and get our initial room number, which will be room number 1. Otherwise, if it is set, then we know we've already showed them something on the web page. We want to find out what they want to do, because obviously if they're coming back, they typed in a command. So basically, I check if the command is set, I interpret that command, I remember the room number in case there's an error, I go to the graph and I say, hey, here's my new direction. And I send in the room number that we were at from that session table. And then if I get back 0, I say, hey, you can't do that. I remember the old room number. And then I go get the description of the room number from the database again. And remember in the session table, what room number we're in. And then I just spit it out. So it's really quite simple.
Could you even map out this the structure for the website interface and all that in like a tree graph form
Yeah.
to make that even more visual and easy to design this interactive structure?
Well, the HTML, the browser actually gets the HTML back, and the HTML is already in a tree-based form, yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So it basically gets the HTML, creates a tree structure inside its memory for it, and then it starts like doing the CSS stuff on the tree, and then it does the stuff that say, okay, I'm at this node, what do I want to show on the GUI? I'm on this node now, what do I want to show at the GUI? So
if you teach someone to learn HTML and like graphical tree format, organization would be really easy to like work as a team because with other like PHP coders and stuff.
yeah.
Or you just want to do it all yourself?
Well, a lot of us just use like one of these things. So
Visual,
yeah,
like side.
we use a visual change it, yeah. But I know from helping out on browsers and stuff, that's basically you get the HTML, you parse it into a tree, then you start walking that tree and seeing what it's doing, and then representing that on the screen. And so that'd be kind of like this thing I was showing here. This is the actual equation. So if you start basically here and you see something that needs to be done, it's like, okay, I gotta stack that. There's something called a stack. If you look in your book, you'll see it. And so we stack where we were, and then we look here and we're like, oh, I gotta do something. And then we pull in 2 and C. So sometimes the node causes something to be done. So example, the multiplication. When we interpret that node, we say, oh, what's this node saying to do? It says multiplication, then you have to call out to a multiplication function and get the values and return that value. And then we make the value that node. And so other nodes are more complicated. This node is the square root, so we'd probably call what's called an infinite series to calculate the node, the square root of something. So we go out and calculate that. So you kind of, you work your way down till you ain't got anything, you remember that, and then you work your way back up and like multiply, divide, square root, blah, blah, blah. It's much more, this tree is much more hard to interpret than the tree that I gave for the map. Because the map, you just have to remember the room number and go from there. So.
This is good for hands-on sketching now, but like it's key to put it in that almost like matrix form. To make
This probably you won't be able to put into a matrix.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You'd have to use another data structure called a stack, and that stack would help you.
Is this more personal than a matrix?
Yes, way more.
Okay.
That's one of the differences between a data structure and an implementation, because like the implementation of that data structure for this use was just a matrix. But an implementation for a data structure for that is going to be a lot more complicated. So.
But the inputs and outputs could be kept in a matrix. So like Excel,
Yeah,
and then having like your math done in the background.
well.
Almost
you
like a
can
Matt
do
lab
that
and
too.
simulate how
Yeah,
those interact
yeah,
and work with each other.
yeah,
You've got like your data storage and then your visual kind of
Yeah.
tree-based mathematics.
So like for the data structure for this would be, I would uniquely identify each node, because if you say a plus, it won't know which plus node that you're at. So you want a unique identifier for that node. You want the operation and the data, because sometimes it's an operation, sometimes it's data. So you have to have an if to decide, am I doing an operation like a divide or multiply?
The air conditioning works better if we open some doors up, and it won't be as loud downstairs for a while.
And, or am I at like a scalar value like this too? So, and then you basically push that onto the stack, bail out of there, get to your next node, and then pull 2 items off the stack because it's a multiplication. And multiply them, stick it back on the stack, go back up. That stack is in your book too, so. So, is it all good? At least got questions for y'all to ask yourselves at home and research on the internet?
And this, these slides will be put up on.
Yeah, this is a PDF file, and I'll put it up with the camera file too, so. As well as a zip file of the code and the schema, for example, the schema. So in a database, you're going to have a totally different thing. So basically here I'm saying I want SQL. I don't want any data. I just want the schema. And don't compress it. So should construct it. This is basically a schema file. And it'll create the table for that particular thing. If we go to the database and say we want the schema. Here's what the schema file would look like. It's basically SQL to tell the database what tables to create. So here's the rooms table, the description table, and the session table.
And this can be saved in like a text file,
Yeah.
and that's sort of like the core kind of.
Well, you save it as a text file, then you load it into your database.
Right.
And it interprets all this stuff and creates entries in the database.
So you could edit from the text file, but it could throw all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's better to have this created.
yeah.
It'd be really hard to program a whole website through text files.
Well, when the websites first came out, we did it
Yeah, that's very crazy.
that way. So,
Very crazy. That's why everything was so blocky and simple, because there was a lot of work just to do that.
and then like for the data, I'll just delete the structure part, say focus on the data, and then the data file would look like this. So here's basically an insert for each of the tables.
So there's your matrix.
Yep.
With all your data points.
Yep.
And if that data or that text file rewrites and resaves to
No.
store data.
No, it does nothing with this text file.
Okay.
So when you go into the database, which is a process on its own, with its own files. So like if I went,
Its own binary, like
yeah,
it's
it's
kind of
binary.
like hard drive.
So if I go to, So its base directory is user local MySQL. So I cd into user local MySQL. This is where MySQL is at. And the data directory is user local MySQL data. So if I go into data, which is this directory here, here's basically all the databases. And if I go into Flint Coders,
What's the file extension for a database file? It could be a lot of different things.
yeah, it's going to be a lot of different things. So if I go into
Because I've heard of like DLL files and stuff like that. Those are like executable files.
yeah, that's in fact this file here. That's data language, the DLL. This is an example of the DLL.
So DLL is in text
Yeah,
format?
right,
Okay,
right.
gotcha.
So we use that DLL file, and then that tells the database server, oh, I want a table, I want this table, blah, blah, blah. Then you throw some SQL at it, and it says, oh, I want these contents in those tables.
So the SQL is the data like file.
Yeah,
It can't be.
yeah. The DLL is actually a subset of SQL, so
That'd be cool to see that tree of how files. It's like,
it's all binary, so can't really show
is
it.
it like linear?
Probably not.
Okay. Be a
Probably
little bit
not.
more complex.
Yeah. So for like this, for the index, if we look at the index on here. So we can see here that there's a B tree, so we're actually using a tree in the database to store each of these records. So that's another use of the trees. Any other questions? Okay, that's it, I guess.
So what would be the first kind of software you should download to do all the control? MyPHP admin would be the first
Probably, well,
to,
the first thing would be, if you're on Windows, get a package like you talked about, because they'll include everything and install everything, and it should all talk to each other.
okay, like code.
It's just Zam.
What's it
Yeah,
called?
and I said it was Zam's XAMPP. You should just type that in Google.
It's called ZAMS.
Zam. XAMPP.
XAMPD.
Yeah. I know it's weird considering when I said the lamp thing, but that's just how it's spelled.
And it's free.
Yeah, for Windows, yeah.
And it's just for developer use. Like
Well, it
just
gives
free
you
developer
developer
software.
tools.
Yeah.
Free developer tools. Isn't that crazy how like developer tools are generally kind of like low cost or
Well, unless we're doing it in progress or something like Oracle,
yeah.
then it's a little more pricey,
Right.
You want to go pro at all, it costs big money.
Yeah. Like fully integrated design system.
I mean,
So like what you would be doing like just for free, if like a large company were to buy that through consultants and stuff, it'd be really expensive.
well, their version will probably have a lot more features to it. But-
Features, buttons,
Mhm.
so that's how they like
differentiate between free
Visual Studio, Visual Studio, it has an express mode, but it also has professional and ultimate costs thousands of dollars, thousands of dollars. Yeah. I got a degree in college and something messed up and I couldn't install it anymore, so I tried
So
to.
Visual Studio is another thing, like Xampped.
No, it's Visual Studios for
C.
.NET language, Visual Basic, C++, C#.
Yeah, Xampp is totally custom to MySQL, PHP.
More for web interface kind of development instead of C.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you kind of got to see how much code is behind it for just one input box.
Yeah.